We have a lot of great generations, a lot of guys that have fought in our wars, but the World War II veterans, and that brings me to our guest, John Digilio, General John Digilio, right?
Welcome to the show.
Yes. Thank you very much for coming on the show. I know that there's a lot to talk about with you, and our audience doesn't know, who you are, but we're gonna do a little brief intro with you, and I'd like to get a little background. You were a general in Vietnam, correct?
No, I was only I shouldn't say only. I was a first lieutenant in Vietnam.
Got it. Okay.
Wow.
Okay, I'm not quite that old. I am old, but not quite that old.
All right. Well, give us the background. Tell us your journey here in the military.
Well, I was commissioned in 1967 as an ROTC graduate from LaSalle College, now LaSalle University in Philadelphia, and we were trained to be artillery officers. We would fire 105s in training, learn how to fire them, learn how to position them, learn how to aim them correctly, hopefully to hit the target the first time, and not use 50 rounds to
you don't have those lasers and all the satellite technology back then,
those were the days. In fact, in high school, we didn't have computers. We had something called a slipstick, which it's a slide rule.
Yeah.
And
I use that at home, by the way. Sorry. Yeah.
In fact, computers and handheld calculators didn't come about back then. So everything was done out of tables and big manuals and with slide rules. So it was an interesting time, but growing up in the late 50s and early 60s was a phenomenal time, especially on Long Island. I was very proud and privileged to be able to grow up at that time.
Yeah, that's excellent.
That's
I mean, that's a great history, and I know that you and I got connected because I went to have breakfast one day, and there's a Vietnam vet with a World War II vet with a World War II hat on, eating breakfast outside with his wife, a gentleman easily in his 90s, I think he was 92, and I walked in, I said hello, and I walked in to get my table, and then I stopped in my tracks, and I said, well, hang on a second, I got to shake this guy's hand. I went back outside, and I shook his hand, I started talking to him, and we had a great conversation, and I told a friend of mine about this, and my friend said, there's a movement right now to honor these guys, and you need to talk to John and his whole team and what they're doing for World War II, the remaining World War II vets and all that type of stuff. So why don't you explain to the audience what it is that you're doing, because we care a lot about these remaining World War II vets, and the rest of the country does too, and let's see if we can create some awareness for this.
Well, first, I'd like to say we appreciate the invite. It's truly a pleasure and an honor to be here to talk about this. What we're trying to do is to ensure that today's generation, the young children in school as well as the young adults, don't forget about what occurred in the early 40s. Unfortunately, in the school systems today, and basically throughout the country, but primarily in the Northeast and in the West Coast, history is taught from a different perspective. To paraphrase what the Irish Nobel laureate Sir Edmund Burke said, those who fail to study history are doomed to repeat it.
Yes.
And we can see that over and over again throughout the world history, as well in the history of our own country. We make the same mistakes. Einstein, said stupidities, doing the same thing over again and expecting different results. We do that in this country. We don't really look in the past and see where did we go astray slightly, and how do we come back on track?
That's right.
So what's happened is that World War II veterans are diminishing at an extremely rapid rate. Obviously, they're in their very late 80s and early to mid 90s. One or two years ago, an article was written in the paper in Raleigh, North Carolina, asking about basically how do we celebrate this World War II generation of men and women who served in our armed forces, both overseas and at home, as well as the wives, the friends, the families of those who were serving. There was an elementary school child named Rabel McNutt. Her godfather was a World War II Medal of Honor winner. And she said to her father, Bill McNutt, who happens to be the chairman of the board of our group, said to her father, are they going to give Godfather, Ehlers, a funeral when he passes away.
Yeah.
And Bill said basically, well, let's look at state funerals and what's been done in the past. And they went on, I would assume YouTube or something like that, and got a video of President Reagan's funeral and General of the Army MacArthur's funeral.
That's right.
And the young child said, are they going to do that for my godfather? And this was the genesis of the thought of we need to ensure that we provide the last living Medal of Honor winner from World War II with a state funeral.
Yeah,
yeah,
that makes total
definitely.
sense. I mean, that's, and I think, your point regarding the youth of today not really understanding, it's not just the youth. There's, generations. First of all, my generation, we never served. And I think, frankly, to me, that's a mistake. I look back in my life and I'm like, I wish I did an ROTC or served a year just to know what it's like, and appreciate these things. But Saving Private Ryan, Hacksaw Ridge, these are movies that they don't have to teach a lot. They just need to show them,
Yeah.
They need to remind people of the brutality and the sacrifice these guys made. It wasn't just about concentration camps and the Jews. This was about, a group wanting to take over the world.
Yep.
Yeah, we fail to realize, I remember I'm an amateur history buff, not that knowledgeable, not that thorough, not that erudite, but amateurish.
We won't put that on the test. You good.
But pictures of Chamberlain walking down the steps from the airplane, I believe he was holding a piece of paper in his hand and said, "We have peace in our time." And look what happened, I believe it was 2 years later.
Yeah.
We tend to think that appeasement and negotiation resolves everything, and hopefully it does.
Right. You want to try that.
Yeah, and many philosophers of the theory of war have said war is the ultimate form of politics.
Wow.
And when politics fail, when compromise fails, war occurs, regardless of the nations involved. It's when individuals and groups and countries no longer sit down to discuss things in an open, candid environment.
Right.
It's
Which makes
a shame.
complete sense. I mean, you even see what's going on today
Yeah.
with North Korea.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd all be sort of, crazy if we didn't say, let's talk about it first. But when people are aggressive, like Hitler was in World War II, and the Chinese were going into Vietnam, and now you've got the radical Islamists and the North Koreans. When they're aggressive like that, and they come from sort of a dictatorial kind of background, force is really one of the only languages that they speak.
Yeah,
you know?
that's one of the
discussion's not.
Yeah, that's one of the misconceptions we have. And I don't want to separate it by geographic, East-West, Europe, North America, nor by education. But conceptually, in certain individuals, deep-rooted is the sense of power. And they only understand power. And we sometimes fail to forget that.
Right.
We fail to remember that. We forget that power is the only thing they understand.
Yes.
And implied power is just as important and effective as implementing power.
Look at Cuba. I mean, Cuba just ran its way up until,
Yeah.
still, Cuba's doing that. So you're now trying to get people to
Yes.
acknowledge this, right, through
Yeah.
your website. So why don't
Yes.
you tell us where
Okay.
that is and
Yeah,
what you're
the
what you're trying
website,
to achieve.
it's very easy to remember. It's not rocket science. They made it easy, especially for me.
Well, we got Rocket Man, we got Rocket Science. What do we got?
Yes, that's very
He's
true.
Rocket
And obviously the website is www.worldwar2 salute. And it's World War II salute. So
.org.
.org.
Right.
So it's not hard to remember. Just in your Bing search, in your MSN search, your Google search, just type World War II salute,
It should
and
come
it'll
up.
come up.
And what are people going to do when they get on the site? What do you want them to do?
What we want them to do is, we're not looking for donations. We're not asking for anything. The only thing we're asking people to do is to spend basically 49 cents.
Okay.
And that's to write a letter to the President of the United States, and a generic letter is on the website and available for them
You
to
grab
copy.
this letter, you send it over to President Trump, which by the way, you have the right president in office right now
yes.
to get this
Yes.
done. there could not be enough things, first of all, for anybody in the military, going to everybody serving right now, back to our surviving World War II vets. There's not enough good things we can do as a country for them. But these World War II vets, we are here because of the sacrifice, that they made. So I want everybody out there watching the show, if you're watching us on social media, watching on TV, please go to that website, worldwar2salute.org, and look for that form and send it to President Trump.
Yeah, and what's important to remember about a state funeral is that the president is the only person that can authorize it. It doesn't require a bill passing through Congress. It doesn't require anything else but the president saying we will have a state funeral for.
I got it, and that's an important thing. We have John Digilio in the studio here. Stick around for social media here for a minute, okay? So just stay right there. Welcome back, John Digilio here. John, you experienced Vietnam to an extent. Tell us a little bit about what was happening at that point in your life when you experienced it.
In the United States Army, I happen to have been in the Medical Service Corps, and I was stationed in California as my first duty assignment as the executive officer of an Army hospital as a second lieutenant, then first lieutenant, which was quite unique, but I had taken a 2-year delay to go to graduate school from active duty, from commissioning, or I was commissioned, then took a 2-year delay to go to graduate school to get my MBA, and because of that, they gave me a position as the executive officer of an Army hospital. I got orders to Vietnam, which was a very tragic experience, getting the orders, and I was the first one to see the orders because back then we had something called a Twix, which was basically like a stock ticker tape, and it had names and where you were going. This was before cell phones, all that good stuff. Cell phones weren't even thought of. We had been trained to be in the military. We were trained to be soldiers, and I think what has to be done when you first look at Vietnam is separate the military or the combat from the political.
Right. That's been my point all along,
because the soldier has no impact on the political directly. It's indirectly that the impact occurs, but the political has significant impact upon the soldier. The soldier basically follows orders, and the way the military is structured, you have officers, senior, junior officers, that are basically the orders filter down. They're told what to do, and then the orders are implemented with the enlisted personnel, the E1s or E2s to E5s, and then the non-commissioned officers, the E5s, 6s, 7s, 8s, and sometimes 9s. So it's the enlisted soldier that is the true implementer of political policy. It's not the officers. The officers give the direction, the orders, set everything up. It's the soldier actually who does it. And any officer, any leader that doesn't take care of his men is not a leader.
Right.
And that's one of the things we need to grasp, both back then and now.
Well, I noticed, I had a social studies teacher, Woody Glaudel. I don't know, Woody, if you're watching, send us a message here because I'd love to hear what you're thinking. He was in Vietnam, and we've heard Paul speak about this, and if you follow Paul on Facebook, Paul Luna here in the studio, you see that on a regular basis, he and his brothers, which is what everybody refers them to, and they've referred that same thing, same way in World War II and so on. He and his brothers get together regularly. There is a bond within the soldiers. It's almost like the politics that go on probably drove you guys closer in this instance than others. I mean, give me a little perspective on that.
Well, and I just came back from my unit's reunion. We were out in Rapid City, South Dakota, and I was stationed at the 95th Evac Hospital in Da Nang, which is by China Beach. No, the only reason I was reluctant to say China Beach because everybody thinks of the TV show, China Beach.
Okay.
And they kind of think of MASH, the movie MASH, as well as the TV show, but that was the Korean War, obviously, where we were in Vietnam. Our hospital called it a 95th Evacuation Hospital. It had an augmentation of a neurological section. We received some of the more significant casualties, the seriously ill and very seriously ill soldiers. It was very traumatic being there. I made a couple of trips to Da Nang Air Base and Da Nang Mortuary, which was unbelievably traumatic to see all the body bags laid out on the stretchers, filling up a hangar. But what we need to focus on, I think, is the soldier and the individual sense of God, country, and duty that the soldiers had. I happen to be a second-generation American, and my father and mother were first-generation Americans, obviously. My grandparents, as the saying goes, came over on the boat in the late 1890s, early 1900s.
All of us the same, man.
Yeah. And we were raised with this concept of giving back to your country, to your community, a concept of service.
Right.
My father was a World War II vet. My uncle was a World War II vet. On my mother's side, she had 3 brothers that served in the military. One was a Marine NCO that was taught to be a pilot, trained to be a pilot in the latter part of World War II. Her other brother lost a leg. He was a combat photographer over New Guinea. The point being is that whether you served in the military or you served in other capacity, the idea that you were brought up with was to give back to the country that made it possible for you to grow and develop in it as you wish to.
Hey, listen, John Kennedy's famous speech.
Yeah.
Ask not what you can do, what your country can do for you. It was what can you do for your country.
One of the things that was beneficial is that we became Americans.
Right.
We assimilated into society. We weren't this faction, we weren't that faction, we were Americans.
Right.
In Vietnam, things were starting to break down. Civil society was starting to break down for whatever reasons, and I'm not a social historian, so those more intelligent than I to judge.
I am. I'll comment on that shortly. Thank you very much.
But what we saw in Vietnam is a giving of oneself. The vast majority of troops in Vietnam were there to serve, to protect and defend.
Right.
Unfortunately, the politicians got in the way. I was fortunate when I was at the Army War College to be a student of Colonel Harry Summers. Colonel Summers was at the Paris peace meetings, and obviously soldiers talk to other soldiers outside of the limelight.
Yeah.
And I forgot, and I think it was the senior Vietnamese person there, said, "You never beat us on the battlefield, but we beat you where it counted. We beat you in Congress."
Well, that brings me to a question that I've heard this statement, and I want to see how you felt being there. So you hear this often when we get close to a war. We're not going to be another Vietnam, and I feel like that question comes from, put the politics aside, comes from the fact that we're never going to get into another war that we don't throw all of what we got at it.
Yeah.
Did you feel, or did other soldiers feel at the time, because you're in the trenches, you don't know what they're throwing in and out, but are you feeling like, hey, why aren't they using all this other stuff we have or not? Was that a feeling there?
There was a lot of downtime where no significant actions were being undertaken. And unfortunately, the old axiom, idle hands or idle mind is the devil's playground. And there was a lot of downtime. And obviously, then you had the influx of drugs, et cetera, and all the other problems that occur with downtime.
Right.
A troop that's busy doesn't get into trouble.
Right.
The military philosophy by the senior leadership, the generals and the political individuals, the civilians in charge of the military, created situations or directed situations that were not true military, where the military's perspective is to close with and destroy.
Right. And some of those things were so not on target for there that just
we didn't close with and destroy.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that has an impact on the soldier.
Yeah.
The Battle of Way was a success. We won the Battle of Way in the Tet Offensive. We beat the NVA and the VC back significantly.
Well, we got to wrap up here,
sorry.
and that, by the way, that's the point I was driving at. Now, before you go, we're talking about the World War II vets and this whole movement. www.worldwar2salute.org. Please, everybody, go there. John, what a pleasure having you on.
Thank
We'd
you
love
so
to have you
much.
back. Thank you so much. Stick around.